It has been exactly 1,114 days since Man United last beat Tottenham. To put this into perspective, on October 19th, 2022, Antonio Conte was still managing Spurs. Erik ten Hag was still seen as a bald messiah, not a bald fraud. And Cristiano Ronaldo was still 28 days away from doing that god-awful interview with Piers Morgan. Since that 2-0 win at Old Trafford, we have played them 7 times in all competitions, drawn twice, and lost 5. It's such a horrendous record that I had to check 2 different sources just to make sure it was real. It's one thing to have poor records against Brighton and Arsenal and Man City, but Tottenham? Our record is so bad that It's United lads is the new It's Tottenham lads. So Ruben Amorim and the players have to treat this game like a cup final. Oh wait, never mind. Amorim and the boys need to treat this like life or death because we can't keep letting Spurs get away with it. On the other hand though, the criminal display that Thomas the Frank Engine put out in their 1-0 loss to Chelsea was genuinely one of the worst performances we've seen in years. They produced just 0.05 XG from 3 shots, which was Tottenham's worst attacking output in the last 25 games, their worst attacking output in the last 50 games, the last 75 games, and in their last 100 games going all the way back to September 2023. To find a game as bad as the one against Chelsea, you have to go all the way back to September 11th, 2021, when Tottenham lost 3-0 to Crystal Palace while Nuno was still managing them. Even in that game, they managed 0.06 XG from 2 shots, so from a per shot perspective, this display against Chelsea was actually 55% worse. So the real question is, which Tottenham are we going to face on Saturday? The one that's beaten us in 5 out of the last 7 games, or the one that produced the 4th lowest XG of all time in the Premier League since XG tracking began? So Tottenham are sitting in 6th this season, level on points with United, but their underlying stats are abysmal. They have scored 17 goals, which is the 3rd best in the league, from 11.8 XG, which is 15th best in the league, and they've conceded 8 goals from 13.72 XG, which is the 11th best in the league. So they've scored 5 more than they're expected to, and conceded 6 less than they're expected to. So Tottenham have basically scammed their way to 6th in the table. And the reason why I'm being so harsh is that 8 out of 9 scorers in the Premier League have overperformed their XG this season. Van de Ven has scored 3 goals from 6 shots, Johnson has 2 from 5, Sarr has 2 from 3, and Bentancur, Tell, and Bergvall have scored 3 from 13 shots combined. So unless they've been tampering with the ball or something, that kind of finishing is just not sustainable over a whole season. Just like United's horrible finishing has reverted back to the mean in the last 4 games. And Tottenham's home form has been terrible this season too, winning only the first game of the season against Burnley, which was also the only game at home in which they created more than 1 XG. Since then, they lost 1-0 to Bournemouth, drew 1-1 with league bottom Wolves, lost 2-1 to a struggling Villa side at the time, and then got spanked by Chelsea at home. So by every metric that I can find, Tottenham should be a lower mid-table team, yet somehow they're sitting 2 places above us in the Premier League table. And that is what makes this game so dangerous. We're playing an underperforming team that's already received its reality check against Chelsea. Their fans were fuming after that result and that performance because as bad as United's recent record is against Tottenham, Spurs had only beaten Chelsea 3 times in their last 20 meetings going back to 2019. So for Tottenham to put in that performance right before hosting United is what scares me, because United being United, we're experts at reviving teams that should be buried. Everyone wants to play us when they're going through a rough patch. So let's take a look at the biggest threats Tottenham could pose on Saturday. So Thomas Frank has preferred a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3 this season. They've had an average possession of about 54%, which is just a few points higher than United at 51%. They're not a very direct team, preferring possession-based build-up that starts with short goal kicks. In fact, they take some of the most goal kicks in the league with 5.2 per game, where the league average is just 3.1 per game. And they are kicking it long from goal kicks, slightly less than average as well. So this tells me that United have an opportunity to force mistakes by pressing high, and our front three being at it from minute one will be crucial. In fact, we can see how uncomfortable they were against the press in this sequence from the Chelsea game. Enzo Fernandez presses Palhinha on the ball and he releases out to Van de Ven. As the ball gets out to Danso at right center back, Chelsea keep pressing man for man high up, and eventually Porro is forced to kick it long and Chelsea win the ball back. So we can potentially get a lot of joy from pressing Tottenham high up the pitch. Now moving on to the second and third phases of build-up, Thomas Frank relies heavily on width rather than progressing the ball through the middle. If we look at their attacking zones, looks like the primary threat areas are down the right-hand side with those two boxes there, which makes sense because Mohamed Kudus has been their best player this season, and I believe he picked up a knock in training, so Brennan Johnson might start this game, which could mean more attacks down their left-hand side with Odegaard and Udogie. Regardless of which side they attack from, the wide areas are something to watch out for because both flanks account for about 63% of their attacks. So let's take a look at some of the specific attacking threats that Tottenham could pose this Saturday. So we're taking a look at the Copenhagen game where they have 8 players in Tottenham's half during build-up, and this guy here is about to play a loose pass straight into Bentancur over there. As Bentancur takes control of this, he plays it out to Xavi, who's completely unmarked because, again, Copenhagen are all out at sea. And as Xavi receives it, you already see Brennan Johnson's on his bike, trying to get in behind between the center back and the fullback here. So Xavi notices that and plays a nice curling ball around the fullback to get into Brennan Johnson here. And as Johnson's about to get to the end of it, the goalkeeper just has a rush of blood and gets out of his box, and he's about to be all the way over here, right there. So Johnson goes wide of the keeper and puts a neat finish into the goal from this angle straight over there. So that's all it took, guys. 2 passes from the defensive third all the way to goal. Amorim needs to look at this and be terrified because it reminds me of exactly how Thomas Frank's Brentford teams used to play. Sit back, soak up the pressure, and within 2 to 3 passes, the ball is in the opposition's net. On the evidence of this goal alone, I don't want Harry Maguire anywhere near the starting 11, and I want United to avoid having 8 players in the Tottenham half at any point. The deepest we should push our center backs is to the halfway line, and Amorim needs to install rear view mirrors on Dallow's shoulders because he can't let Porro or Brennan Johnson get past him the way Savona did in that Forest game. By the way, here's a cool little XG detail about that Johnson goal. Even though he shot this from an extremely tight angle from outside the box, the XG for this shot was 0.55, all because it was an empty net. So it's a great reminder that XG isn't just about where the shot is taken from. It also factors in things like the goalkeeper's position, the number of defenders, and how much pressure the shooter is under. And in this case, the eye test completely backs it up. Bad angle, yes, but still a very high quality chance. Now here's another similar opportunity that Tottenham created down the flanks. We start with Odegaard going for a loose ball here. It ends up falling to Udogie on this side, and Copenhagen yet again are not prepared for the counterattack because they have 8 players in the Tottenham half. Seriously, what are you guys doing? As we play it forward a bit, Odegaard makes this run in behind, in the half space between the fullback and the center back, as we'll see in a second right there. This is exactly the same run that Brennan Johnson made for the first goal that we just saw. Now Udogie manages to find him just like Xavi found Johnson with a curling pass on the outside. And now Tottenham are basically 3v1 against the backline because the fullback has just gone to ground. And as Odegaard gets to the edge of the box, he unfortunately picks out the wrong pass into Johnson instead of finding Sarr or Xavi over here, and nothing ends up coming of this chance. But that type of attack is something we really have to worry about in this game. On their left, which is our right, we have Mbeumo, Ahmad, Casemiro, and Euro to defend against attacks like this. We know Mbeumo and Ahmad are both wingers, so their defensive capabilities are limited. Euro is still only 19, and Casemiro is our only senior statesman on this side of the pitch, but even he shits himself sometimes on the counterattack and puts in a sliding tackle and goes to ground. So we have to be very careful defending against those counterattacks. Let's take a look at the second goal against Copenhagen now, and there's a very familiar Brentford flavor to it. Vicario's initiating the build-up to Romero with the center backs very split and the fullbacks on the touchlines. As Romero plays his ball out to Porro just behind my head over here, Copenhagen try to press high, and Porro ends up going long into Kolomwani up ahead. And as this ball is coming into Kotarski, the goalkeeper, this time he hesitates to commit to the ball, so he barely gets there ahead of Sar, and he ends up kicking it into Sar instead, which means Sar is now behind the whole Copenhagen team with an empty net. And as he brings this ball down and we skip it forward just a little bit, we'll see that all three defenders are attracted to what Sar is doing instead of paying attention to the two free men at the edge of the box. And then he plays an easy pass out to Odeberg, who puts it straight into the net. Now, aside from the fact that Copenhagen are just playing stupid football, this is again 3 to 4 passes from Tottenham to get the ball up the pitch and put the ball in the back of the net. So we have to be careful not to overcommit to the press. We have to be careful not to play too high a line, and we have to be prepared for these counterattacks. Now, the last thing we'll take a look at is the thing that worries me more than anything else in this game, because it's that Mickey van de Ven goal against Copenhagen. We start with Copenhagen overcommitting yet again in the final third. Paulinho comes back to win this ball from the ball carrier, and it falls straight to Van de Ven, and what follows is easily the best goal I've ever seen a defender score. He drives up with the ball and gets just beyond these two pressers right here to get to this area where he decides to move on the outside to evade the tackle from this defender, as we'll see in a second right there. Then the right back tries to come inside and cut him off, but he rides that tackle too. And now Tottenham are basically 2v1 straight through on goal. Van de Ven manages to get to the edge of the box quite easily, and he puts a nice finish from just inside the box past Kotarski to make it 3-0 for Tottenham. Now, I'm going to preface the praise for this goal with the fact that the Copenhagen coach should probably get sacked immediately after a performance like that. How you can have 8 players in attack for the second and third goal after Brennan Johnson already scored the first one is beyond me. I don't care that Tottenham are down to 10 men in the 55th minute. You have no response to Tottenham's counterattack, and you're still choosing to play such suicidal tactics. But this was great work from Van de Ven, and he did the same thing against us last year when he dribbled past the whole team and assisted the Brennan Johnson opener in that 3-0 loss. The way we defend in the 3-4-3 system relies heavily on players rotating to cover for other players off the ball. If this rotation isn't timed perfectly, it leaves lanes wide open for runners like Van de Ven or Udogie to drive straight through the middle of our team like freight trains. That is why Amorim needs to make it crystal clear for Mbumo, for Casemiro, for Ahmad, and for Euro. If Van de Ven or Udogie is charging through the center, don't let him travel 60 yards unchallenged. Take the tactical foul and regroup. Because we have to become harder to play through, we have to become harder to score against, especially after the losses against Brentford and Forest. United's soft underbelly has very much been exposed. Counterattacks and set pieces are a clear weakness, and we can't afford to make the same mistakes against Tottenham. Now, to close out this preview, let's take a look at what Amorim needs to do to go win this game. Even though Tottenham have been a possession-heavy, build-out from the back kind of team under Thomas Frank, we've just seen how switching to a more direct counter-attacking style just gave them their best attacking performance of the season. So after producing the worst performance in Premier League history against Chelsea, Thomas Frank's only mission now is to deliver a feel-good win against Man United at home and to get the fans back on side and his project back on track. Make no mistake, Thomas Frank will approach this game to win at all costs. They'll happily sit on 40% possession, they'll happily score from set pieces or corners, and they'll happily counter-attack whenever we commit forward. Amorim has to see this game plan coming from Frank a mile away. So like I said earlier, Euro over Maguire is a must. I also think Mount and Cunha should start up top for 2 key reasons. If Frank wants to if Thomas Frank wants to press us high at home, we need to be ready to just kick it long like we did against Liverpool. And in that case, we could use the likes of Cunha and Mount packing the midfield just like we did against Liverpool and win the second balls. And for this reason, I think Frank might actually start Palhinha in a 4-3-3 instead of Simons to counteract some of those second balls in midfield. However, if Frank decides to engage in a mid-block and play Simons instead, then Cunha as the starting number 9 is even more essential. He can drop deeper to pull Tottenham's midfielders and defenders out of position into these areas so that Mbeumo, Mount, and Bruno can get in behind them and catch them off guard. So I think our approach for this game should be a hybrid between the Liverpool game at Anfield and the Brighton game at home. Tottenham will want to have the ball and be the protagonist for parts of this game, during which we have to be prepared to play it long and win the second balls. For other periods, Tottenham will probably want to sit in a mid-block and counterattack, especially if they go goal up in the first half or something. So we have to be ready to pull them out of position and get in behind with those diagonal runs that we've already seen Mbeumo and Cunha making this season. I think Mazraoui will make a great impact off the bench, especially if Ahmad is getting overrun physically, so on that right wing spot. And I'd expect Mount to make way for Šeško in the second half, especially because he can't really play past 60 minutes. I just really hope he scores this game and Gary Neville can just stop talking about him. Because you know Gary's going to say, oh, he's improved because I called him out. Just classic media stuff. But anyways, that's the preview for Tottenham. If we get everything right here, we can win this 2-1 or 3-1. I don't see us keeping a clean sheet. If we're not up for a physical battle like Brentford or Forest, we could lose this game, and don't be surprised if the Amorim out brigade wakes up again. Get in the comments below with your thoughts. If you like the stats that I used in this video, go check out xgstat.com and use my code FWAE50 for 50% off your first month. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.